I remember the exact moment I realized my wife, Margaret, was cheating on me. Not because of some dramatic, movie-style reveal with tears and confessions. Oh no, Margaret wasn't the type for that. She was way too practical for messy emotions. If she could have outsourced our anniversary dinner to a subcontractor, she would have. No, the moment came to me in the middle of the most mundane task imaginable, assembling a bookshelf. Picture this. Me, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by planks of wood with names that sound like Swedish sneeze words, holding an instruction manual that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. There was a screw in my hand, a look of determination on my face, and a growing suspicion in my gut that this entire project was doomed. Margaret, of course, was out. Book club night, she had said, breezing past me while I wrestled with the world's most uncooperative Allen wrench. She hadn't been to a book club meeting in at least 3 years, and the last time she did, I'm pretty sure the only thing she read was the wine list. But sure, let's pretend she was suddenly overcome with a burning desire to discuss 19th century Russian literature. I was halfway through cursing out a particularly stubborn shelf bracket when I noticed something odd. A tiny, folded receipt, peeking out from under the couch. Now, I'm not a naturally suspicious man, but when you've spent the last hour losing a battle of wits to a set of screws, your mind starts looking for distractions. So, I reached over, grabbed the paper, and unfolded it. And there it was. The smoking gun. Not a hotel receipt. Not a jewelry store bill. Something much worse. A receipt from Bradley's Sports Emporium. To anyone else, that might not mean much. But to me, that was a neon sign flashing. Your wife is lying to you, Stephen. Margaret hated sports. Margaret actively avoided sports. Margaret once referred to the Super Bowl as that event where they have the commercials and some sort of ball-based intermission. And yet, here was a receipt with her name on it for, oh, let's see, a pair of running shoes, a gym membership, and a protein shake. A protein shake. Margaret's idea of an energy drink was coffee with an extra sugar packet. And suddenly, she was downing protein shakes like she was training for a marathon? Now, I could have ignored it. Could have told myself that maybe she had a sudden and passionate interest in personal fitness. Maybe she was finally taking my suggestion that a single flight of stairs shouldn't leave a person gasping for air. Or maybe, and here's the fun part, maybe she had a brand new reason to be interested in working out. A very specific, very male-shaped reason. I sat there, staring at the receipt, my mind spinning. And that's when I noticed the second piece of evidence. Not a dramatic text message or a lipstick-stained collar. No, something much simpler. The bookshelf. The one I was currently building. The one Margaret had insisted we needed. Only, here's the thing, I don't read. At least, not books that require shelves. I read articles, blogs, the occasional "is this chest pain serious?" search on WebMD. Margaret, on the other hand, owned exactly 4 books. And 2 of them were cookbooks, which I'm pretty sure she kept around just to make the kitchen look less like a showroom. So why did we suddenly need an entire bookshelf? The realization hit me like a truck. This bookshelf wasn't for me. It wasn't for us. It was for someone else. Because if you're sneaking around, if you're suddenly working late and going to book club meetings that don't exist, if you're buying sports gear and drinking protein shakes and doing anything other than what you've done for the last 15 years, then you're making room for something or someone new. I leaned back against the half-assembled shelf, staring at the ceiling, and let out a long, slow breath. Well, I muttered to no one in particular. At least now I know why she suddenly cares about cardio. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, just staring at the receipt like it was going to come to life and start explaining itself. Margaret. Sports. Gym memberships. Running shoes. Protein shakes. It was like reading a science fiction novel where the main character wakes up in an alternate dimension. Now, I could have let it go. Could have just casually mentioned it over dinner. Oh hey, Margaret, didn't know you were training for the Olympics. Should I start worrying about you challenging me to a push-up contest? But something told me that if I brought it up, she'd have some carefully rehearsed answer, some perfect little explanation that would make me feel like a moron for even asking. So, I decided to do something radical. I decided to use logic. Margaret had never owned workout clothes in her life. That meant, if she was suddenly running on treadmills and gulping down protein shakes, there had to be evidence of this new, active lifestyle. Shoes by the door. A gym bag. A tragic attempt at leggings. I went to check. The front door? No running shoes. The only shoes there were her usual flats and the ugly sandals she insisted were fashionable because some article said so. The closet? No gym bag. Just her usual array of work outfits and a few things she'd probably bought in a fit of optimism and never worn. Laundry basket? No sweaty workout clothes. No pile of socks stiff with the effort of an honest workout. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I'd say Margaret had never even opened the gym membership she paid for. It was like she had paid for the lifestyle, but skipped the actual working out. And that's when it hit me. Margaret wasn't going to the gym. Margaret just needed an excuse to be somewhere else. Now, a normal person at this point might have confronted their spouse directly, might have sat them down and said, "Hey, what's going on?" But I wasn't feeling particularly normal that day. I was feeling something else. I was feeling like I wanted proof. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed my own wife. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't thrilled about this plan. I'm not a detective. I don't lurk in bushes or wear disguises. But Margaret had a schedule. She was predictable. She left for the gym at exactly 6:30 p.m., right after work, and came home around 8. That gave me a perfect window to see where she was really going. So, at 6:29, I got in my car and waited. At 6:30 on the dot, Margaret stepped out of the house, looking exactly the same as she always did. No gym bag. No sneakers. Just her usual work outfit and her purse. I followed from a safe distance. Not because I was worried she'd recognize my car. I drive a perfectly forgettable sedan that blends into traffic like wallpaper, but because I wasn't sure what I'd do if she caught me. She drove for about 15 minutes before pulling into a strip mall. A strip mall. Not exactly the pinnacle of romance. I was expecting something a little more dramatic, some mysterious apartment complex, maybe some guy waiting in a sleek sports car, not a shopping center wedged between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. She parked and walked inside, and that's when I saw where she was going. Spencer's Tax Services. That's right. My wife, my sports-hating, gym-avoiding wife, had just walked into a tax office. Now, unless she was developing a passionate interest in financial literacy, something was definitely off. I waited, watching. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Then, out walked Margaret. And right behind her, a man I had never seen before. He wasn't particularly remarkable. Mid-40s, clean-cut, wearing a button-up shirt that screamed, "I do spreadsheets for a living." But the way he walked her to her car, the way they stood just a little too close, the way she laughed at something he said, it was all too familiar. And then, just as I was telling myself I was probably overreacting, that I was seeing things that weren't there, she hugged him. Not the casual, "Oh hey, thanks for doing my taxes" kind of hug. No, this was the kind of hug that lingered. The kind where arms tighten just a little too much. The kind of hug you don't give your accountant unless he's handling more than just your deductions. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought I might break it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just irritated. Irritated at how stupidly cliché it all was. Margaret wasn't having some dramatic, whirlwind affair. She wasn't running off to Paris with a mysterious stranger. She was seeing some guy from Spencer's Tax Services. This was the kind of affair that came with itemized deductions. I watched as they stood there for another minute, talking, laughing. Then Margaret got into her car and drove off, and the guy, let's call him tax guy, walked back into his office like he didn't just blow up 15 years of marriage. I sat there for a long time. Then, I turned my car around and drove home. Because I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had a better plan. Margaret had spent months thinking she was clever, thinking she had covered her tracks, thinking she had me fooled. But she wasn't the only one who could play that game. And if she thought I was just going to sit back and let her get away with it, she had another thing coming. The next morning, Margaret acted like nothing had happened. She got up, stretched, and went about her usual routine. Coffee, phone scrolling, occasional glances in my direction like I was some kind of houseplant she had forgotten to water. It was almost impressive. I, on the other hand, was in a fantastic mood. Not because I was enjoying any of this, but because I had a plan. Margaret thought she was subtle. Margaret thought she was smart. Margaret thought she was untouchable. She wasn't. I walked into the kitchen, whistling. "Morning," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Morning, superstar athlete. How's the training going?" She finally looked up. "Huh. The gym. The running shoes. The whole thing. How's it going?" There was a half-second delay before she answered. A small, barely noticeable glitch in the system. "Oh, you know," she said, going back to scrolling. It's fine. I smiled. Great. Maybe we should go together sometime. Now, that got her attention. She looked up, eyebrows raised just a fraction. You? The gym? Why not? I shrugged. I mean, if you're suddenly into it, I might as well give it a shot. She let out a small laugh. You wouldn't last 5 minutes. I guess we'll never know if we don't go, right? I could see her brain doing backflips, trying to find a way out of this. She had 2 options. Call my bluff and agree, which meant she'd have to suddenly become a person who actually goes to the gym. Make an excuse and risk making it obvious she was lying. She chose option 3. She said, stretching again. I don't want to make you feel bad. I'm already pretty far along in my routine. You'd probably slow me down. The expert deflection. I almost applauded. Fair enough, I said, grinning. Maybe after you finish your advanced training, I can tag along. Yeah, sure, she said, already checking out of the conversation. And with that, she went on with her morning, and I went on with mine. Margaret thought she had successfully dodged a bullet. Margaret had no idea I had already pulled the trigger. She left for work at her usual time. I gave it exactly 10 minutes, then grabbed my keys and got in the car. Now, I wasn't about to pull another amateur stakeout in a parking lot. That was sloppy work. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something so solid that even Margaret, with her Olympic-level ability to lie through her teeth, couldn't talk her way out of it. I drove straight to Spencer's Tax Services. The office was open. I walked in. A woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. Hi there. How can I help you? I gave her my best harmless fool smile. Hey, yeah, I was just wondering. I heard great things about this place. A friend of mine told me you guys really go the extra mile for your clients. Her face lit up. Oh, well, we do our best. Yeah, he was saying something about one of your guys. Real professional, really takes care of his customers. She nodded. That sounds like Greg. He's our best. Greg. I had a name. Greg, huh? I said, like I wasn't already mentally writing his name in a list of people I'd like to accidentally trip into traffic. Yep, she said. He's been with us for years. Really dedicated to his clients. I bet. Is he in today? He's with a client right now, but I can check if he has any availability later. No rush, I said. Just wanted to put a face to the name. You know, before I bring in my finances. She beamed. Of course. Feel free to wait a few minutes. He should be wrapping up soon. Perfect. I sat in one of the chairs, casually flipping through a tax brochure like I wasn't plotting Margaret's social downfall in real time. And then, like a gift from the universe, Greg himself walked out of his office. He was exactly what I expected. Early 40s. Boring haircut. Shirt neatly tucked in like he lived his life according to an instruction manual. The kind of guy who thought the highlight of his year was finding a loophole in a tax code. And there, following behind him, was his latest client. Margaret. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. She looked way too comfortable. Not in a guilty way. Not in an oh no, I've been caught way. No, she looked settled. Like she belonged there. Like this was just another normal day. She turned to him, laughing at something he said, lightly touching his arm. And then, because Margaret is the kind of person who insists on making things worse, she smiled. It was a specific kind of smile. A smile that said, I've already decided I'm getting away with this. Greg, meanwhile, had the clueless confidence of a man who thinks his secrets are safe. They stood there, chatting for a few more seconds before she finally said, Okay, I'll see you later. Later. Not next week. Not at tax season. Later. I got up, casually walked toward the front desk, and said, Actually, I think I'll come back another time. And then I walked right past Margaret. She didn't even notice. Because why would she? As far as she was concerned, I was sitting at home, assembling her stupid bookshelf. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and smiled. I had everything I needed. Margaret had built a very comfortable little life for herself. She thought she had control. She thought she was calling the shots. She was wrong. Because now it was my turn. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not for a confrontation. Not for some dramatic shouting match where Margaret would pretend to cry and act offended that I didn't trust her. No, I was preparing for something better. Margaret had spent months thinking she was clever, that she had her little routine all figured out. She thought she was subtle. She thought she was smart. Margaret had never been smart, and I was about to prove it. First things first, I needed more evidence. Not for myself. I already knew what was going on. But if I was going to do this right, I needed something concrete. Something that left no room for Margaret to twist her way out of it. So, I did what any reasonable husband would do in this situation. I hired a professional, not a private investigator. That would have been the obvious move, and honestly, a little over the top. No, I went for something much simpler. I called Carl. Carl was not a detective. Carl was my cousin, a pest control guy. And, more importantly, Carl had access to hidden cameras. See, Carl had this whole thing where people in the neighborhood would hire him to set up security cameras disguised as pest control equipment. They were completely legal, just tiny, discreet cameras that nobody would ever think to look for. Which was exactly what I needed. Carl didn't even ask questions. He just sighed, muttered something about Margaret always giving me bad vibes, and by the next day, there was a brand new termite inspection unit installed right outside Spencer's Tax Services. By the end of the week, I had everything. Footage of Margaret meeting up with Greg outside of office hours. Footage of them getting into his car together. Footage of them driving to places that had nothing to do with taxes. There was even a clip where Greg, this grown man, this accountant of questionable morals, held the door open for her like he thought he was smooth. Disgusting. Now, a less creative man would have confronted Margaret with this evidence immediately. But I wasn't going to waste this moment. No, this deserved something better. Margaret had built a perfect little image of herself, devoted wife, hardworking woman, responsible adult. And it was time to tear it down. So I got organized. Step 1. Margaret loved her social life. She thrived on her reputation. And the best way to make a person miserable is to let them destroy themselves in front of an audience. Step 2. Margaret had a habit of oversharing her life on social media. That's why, on a lovely Saturday afternoon, I announced to the world that I had a big surprise for my wonderful wife. A celebration, an appreciation event, something that Margaret wouldn't dare to cancel because she loved attention too much. I sent out messages to her family, her closest friends, and even a few of her co-workers. Margaret has been working so hard lately. I wanted to do something special for her. They ate it up. Margaret, of course, was suspicious. "What's this about?" she asked that morning, staring at me over her coffee. "Just something nice," I said, smiling like the loving husband I was pretending to be. She frowned. "You know I hate surprises." That was the biggest lie she had ever told. She loved surprises, as long as they made her look good. "Just trust me," I said, patting her hand like I hadn't spent the past week watching her cheat on me through hidden cameras. She sighed. "Fine. But if this is some weird barbecue with your cousin Carl, I'm leaving early." Carl was actually very offended when I told him that later. Now, Margaret assumed this was going to be some casual lunch. Maybe a small party where people would take turns saying how wonderful she was. Margaret assumed wrong. The venue? Our house. The guest list? Margaret's people. The main event? A beautifully edited video presentation showcasing her extracurricular tax activities. By the time Margaret walked in, all smiles, expecting people to clap and tell her how great she was, the TV screen was already playing. First clip, Margaret stepping out of her car, Greg already waiting. Second clip, Margaret laughing at something he said, touching his arm. Third clip, Greg opening the door for her like a discount Prince Charming. The room went dead silent. Margaret froze. Greg, who had somehow been fool enough to show up, turned the exact color of expired yogurt. And me? I just smiled. "Margaret," I said, turning to her, "would you like to explain your fitness journey to everyone?" She did not. There were gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Her sister's mouth fell open so wide she could have caught a fly. Margaret tried to save it. This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "You're twisting things. This isn't what it looks like." "Oh good," I said, crossing my arms. "Because to me, it looks like you've been skipping the gym and making some questionable deductions." Her mother looked like she wanted to pass out. Greg? Gone. He had vanished faster than my respect for him. Margaret turned back to me, eyes wild. "You set this up?" "Oh, don't give me too much credit," I said, shaking my head. "I just put together some highlights. You did all the real work." And then, because I believe in timing, I pulled out the divorce papers. Signed. Ready. Margaret stared at them like they were a court summons. "You're not serious." I was. "Oh, I am," I said, handing them over. "I already made copies. Just needed you to see them first." Margaret didn't move. The whole room was watching her. And suddenly, she realized something. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about her losing control, her losing the story. And that was worse than the divorce itself. She didn't say a word as I walked past her, past the stunned guests, and straight out the front door. Because I had already won. Margaret thought she had planned everything. Margaret thought she was untouchable. But in the end, she had played herself. Margaret did not take it well. I'll be honest, I expected some kind of reaction. A tantrum, screaming, maybe even a dramatic, "How could you do this to me?" As if I were the villain in this situation. But no, Margaret went for a different approach. Margaret went full war mode. The next morning, before I even had my first cup of coffee, I got an email from a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, her cousin, Daniel. A man who once spent an entire Thanksgiving explaining why jury duty was just a fancy scam, but was now apparently some legal mastermind. The email was short and ridiculous. Margaret is requesting full ownership of the house, a division of assets in her favor, and financial compensation for emotional distress. I laughed so hard I almost choked on my coffee. Margaret, who had been sneaking around like a discount spy, had the audacity to claim emotional distress. I could have ignored it, could have just forwarded it to my lawyer and gone about my day. But no, Margaret wanted a war? Fine. I had time. Step 1, Margaret wanted the house. Which was funny, considering she had spent the last 5 years complaining about how much she hated our neighborhood. Too boring, she'd say. Too many people with bad taste in lawn decorations. But now, suddenly, she was treating it like it was some historic landmark. The best part? The house was entirely in my name. Margaret had never contributed a single cent to the mortgage. Why? Because she had once convinced herself that being on the deed was too much commitment. A genius move, really. My response to Daniel was simple. Looking forward to seeing the legal basis for Margaret's claim. Also, tell her to pick up her stuff. It's on the curb. Step 2, Margaret wanted money. Now, this was interesting because Margaret had always made it very clear that she was independent. She had her own career. She didn't need a man to support her. Yet, here she was, trying to milk me for every dollar she could. Daniel's email included some nonsense about how Margaret had contributed significantly to my financial success. This was especially hilarious because the only financial advice Margaret had ever given me was, "You should buy a lottery ticket." So, I sent a simple reply. Please provide documentation of Margaret's contributions. Unless we're counting emotional debt, in which case, she owes me first. Step 3, Margaret was not happy. And when Margaret wasn't happy, Margaret got petty. Over the next few weeks, Margaret went on a full-blown sabotage mission. First, she tried turning my friends against me. This was a bold move, considering most of my friends already hated her. She reached out to Mike, my oldest friend, telling him I had humiliated her and that she just needed support. Mike responded with a thumbs-down emoji and sent me a screenshot. Next, she tried to ruin my workplace reputation. Margaret had always been vaguely aware of what I did for a living, but had never cared enough to learn the details. That didn't stop her from emailing my boss, claiming I had been emotionally unstable and engaging in questionable behavior. Unfortunately for her, my boss was a reasonable human being and simply forwarded me the email with LOL. You good? Then, Margaret tried the ultimate move, taking my car. Margaret had never once driven my car. She didn't even like my car. But suddenly, she claimed she had a right to it. She showed up at my driveway with a tow truck. I stood there, coffee in hand, watching as the driver got out, looking mildly confused. Margaret, looking like she had just won the lottery, crossed her arms. I spoke to my lawyer. The car is part of the assets. I can take it. I took a sip of my coffee. Did your lawyer tell you the car is registered exclusively in my name? Margaret's smug expression flickered. I turned to the tow truck guy, who had already pulled up the vehicle's information. He nodded. Yeah, she's not on here. Margaret's face twisted into something beautiful. She turned to me. You're being impossible. Oh, I'm being impossible. I gestured around us. You brought a tow truck. The driver, now visibly uncomfortable, looked between us and muttered, Yeah, I'm just gonna head out. Margaret stomped back to her car and sped off. And that's when I realized something important. Margaret wasn't trying to win. Margaret was trying to exhaust me. She knew she had no real case. She knew she wasn't getting the house, the car, or the money. But she wanted me to suffer. She wanted me to spend months dealing with legal nonsense, draining my time, energy, and patience. So, I did something Margaret didn't expect. I settled it. I sent Daniel one final email. Margaret can take whatever she wants from the house. I'll even throw in some of the wedding gifts we never used. But she's getting zero money, and she knows it. Let's just sign and be done. And just like that, the war was over. Margaret, despite her best efforts, had lost. And when she finally came to pick up her things, she gave me one last look. Like she was searching for something. Maybe an apology. Maybe some sign of regret. But she got nothing. Because Margaret had already taken up enough of my time. And I was finally free. The silence after Margaret left was strange. Not peaceful, not satisfying, just strange. It wasn't like in the movies where the hero stands victorious, hands on his hips, basking in the glory of his well-earned revenge. No, it was just me, in my Margaret-free house, looking around and realizing I had no idea what to do next. For the first time in years, my schedule wasn't dictated by whatever Margaret needed, wanted, or decided was important that day. No unnecessary errands. No listening to her complain about how everyone she knew was somehow failing her. No pretending to be interested in her coworkers' unbelievable drama that always turned out to be boring nonsense. I stood there for a moment, then did the most rational thing possible. I grabbed my phone and texted Carl. Me, it's done. She's gone. Carl, finally. You alive? Me, barely. But I need a beer. Carl, on my way. Also, you still owe me for that hidden camera setup. Me, put it on my tab. 20 minutes later, Carl showed up at my house, six-pack in hand, grinning like a man who had been waiting for this moment way too long. We sat on the couch, cracked open our drinks, and let the absurdity of the past few months settle. Carl took a sip, then smirked. So what now? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What now? For years, my life had been about navigating Margaret. Now, Margaret was gone. The possibilities were endless. I could do whatever I wanted. Travel? Pick up a new hobby? Finally learn how to assemble furniture without feeling like I was on the losing side of a war? But before I could answer, Carl spoke again. Wait, before you decide anything, I have something important to ask. I raised an eyebrow. What? He took another sip, then looked me dead in the eye. Can I say I told you so now? Or do I have to wait? I groaned. I hate you. He grinned. That's fair. The truth was, everyone had warned me about Margaret. Carl, my friends, even a random old lady at the DMV once. But I hadn't listened. Because love makes you stupid. Not in a dramatic, poetic way. In a real, embarrassingly stupid way. You start ignoring obvious red flags. You tell yourself that they'll change. That it's just a phase. That maybe you're the problem. Spoiler alert, you're not. Margaret had spent years treating me like I was lucky to have her. As if she was some rare gem I had somehow managed to stumble upon, and I should spend the rest of my life proving I was worthy. But the reality? Margaret was exhausting. And now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't exhausted anymore. I exhaled, feeling something weirdly close to relief. You know what, Carl? What? I think I just got my energy back. Carl grinned. That's the spirit. Now let's talk about something important. I sighed. What now? He leaned forward, serious. Are you keeping the couch? I looked at the couch we were sitting on. It was Margaret's choice. It was uncomfortable. It was the color of sadness. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and tossed them to Carl. Let's go buy a new one. Carl grinned. Now you're talking. And just like that, I closed the chapter on Margaret. Not with some dramatic farewell. Not with bitterness. Just with a new couch and a future that, for once, was actually mine. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel